Right, we let's move on to talk about bond strategies. First strategy is immunization, which we also like to call laddering. And as you will see in a moment, there is a logic behind why it's called laddering as well. So what we are going to do with this immunization, right? And all of us are currently familiar with the immunization word. We are off to buy securities with a range of maturities, right? See, when we look at a fixed income strategy, we like to look at all of our individual bonds which are composed of the fund, right? So if we take a tenor wise, if we take the long term, the medium, if we take the short term, medium term and long term, if we look at our fund or if we look at our portfolio, if we have significant proportions of our tenors in these sections, right? For example, you will see this in a minute. This is called a barbell strategy, because it's shaped like a barbell where you have the two weights on the side, barbell strategy. If you structure your portfolio like this, for example, if there are any, or let's actually look at a more simpler structure again, short term, medium term, long term. If I take my portfolio, let's say 80% of my portfolio is long term, 10% on medium term and 10% on short term. So I have 10% of my bonds in the portfolio which are less than, a year or two, shall we say. I have another 10% of the bonds in my portfolio are about 2 to 5 years. 80% of the bonds in my portfolio are long term. The issue here is if long-term interest rates change, right, meaning this entire proportion of my portfolio is going to be at risk, the implication, the impact on my overall portfolio is going to be significant. Impact on my overall portfolio is going to be significant. Now, in contrast, when you look at a laddering strategy on the other hand, what happens is the situation that you are looking at is, this is the long term. You will have, for example, let's look at a near perfect situation, sort of 33% you will have in short term, 33% in the medium term, and 34% in the long term. Right? Now, as you can see, I have bonds across the different maturities. Right now, the implication, if one maturity is affected, right, and don't forget, I'll have maturities across all these periods, right? Across all these periods, I'll have maturities, right? Which means in between here, all these maturities, I'm going to have a bond. Now, let's say long-term 9-year interest rates are going to change. Now the resulting impact on my portfolio is limited because only a small proportion of my portfolio is going to be affected. Let's say short-term interest rates change over the next year or two, the overall implication to my strategy, to my portfolio is going to be limited because a greater proportion of the portfolio, the interest exposure is not affected by it. Right? This is why we also call this laddering strategy immunization. Why we call this a ladder is, if you look at the tenors, you have bonds across a wide range of maturities. You can see, right, it's shaped like a ladder, right? At least the lying down ladder. And we have minimal implications to the overall portfolio value from changes in interest rates affecting a specific period of time. Essentially, we'd like to call this situation where we have immunized our portfolio in relation to interest rate changes. Right? So funds are available to invest across a range of the investment horizon. reduces the portfolio sensitivity to interest rate risk by not concentrating on a particular maturity. This is what I told you. You go and put 80% of your funds in a long-term bond. When the long-term interest rate changes, if and when it does, the resulting impact to your portfolio is significant, which means the resulting impact to your overall portfolio is also going to be significant. You ladder your portfolio, right? You have, balanced weightages across different maturities in your portfolio. Now, if one particular maturity, the interest rate is affected, the implication to your overall portfolio is going to be limited because you're not concentrating your portfolio into any particular maturity. The consideration is we are looking to balance between the respective tenors. Only short-term securities, stability since low interest rate sensitivity but low yield. Long term, when you look at the balance, low stability but higher yield, right? So you need to balance this aspect across as well, because if not, your return is also going to be at risk. You can't purely go into the long term chasing yield because the stability is not there. You can't purely go after stability looking at the short term because the yield is not there. Right? So this needs to get balanced across. Right? So what we are seeing in terms of the strategies also, guys, are very, we are scratching the surface. Right? There are so many other strategies. I mean, there's so much more detail within the strategies which you can undertake with respect to managing, with respect to profiting, with respect to hedging, limiting the exposures. All of these elements are there in more detail. Right, but not part of our curriculum, of course. Then you have the barbell strategy. This one I mentioned to you, right? Here, the holdings are concentrated on the two ends of the spectrum: 40% short term, 40% long term, 20% in the medium term. Right? And understandably, since in the short term I have 40% heavyweight, in the long term I have 40% heavyweight. In the medium term, I have 20% smaller weight. So the implication to my portfolio is what? If short term or long term interest rates, if anywhere at this end of the tenor, that interest rate changes, that is what has the greatest ability to affect my portfolio as a whole. Right? If medium-term interest rates change, due to our concentration being lower, the overall implication to the portfolio is relatively much lesser. Right? Short-term exposure. Now we are balancing it, right? The short-term exposure gives the stability, but not the yield. The long-term exposure gives us the yield, higher yield, but not as much stability. Now you're kind of balancing the portfolio across to make the best of both worlds. The laddering strategy will have a relatively lower volatility, lower risk, lower sensitivity, and as a result, the related return is also going to be relatively low. The barbell strategies, you are skewing it towards the ends of the extremes of the portfolio. The chances that you can make money out of one end whilst the other is not performing as much is also going to be, the probability is going to be relatively high. So here the barbell strategy, due to some level of concentration, as you can see, the risk is also relatively higher, but at the same time, the return or the yield potential is also relatively high. You can also take active bond strategies as well, generally used by portfolio managers who believe the bond market is not efficient and therefore mispriced. I mean, when it comes to any financial markets, the whole objective here is this very aspect, right? You are looking for mispriced securities. If they are undervalued, you will buy now, and when they are efficiently priced, you will sell off. If they are overpriced now, you will try to sell off. This is where short selling comes in, and make a gain on the respective strategies. We are after market inefficiencies in order to capture return. Bond switching or swapping is used to exchange bonds perceived to be over or underpriced. This is exactly what we are talking about. You would want exposure to underpriced bonds, and you would want to switch exposures which are overpriced. Right? That's why you make your return. Market timing is also going to be important with any listed security, right? You don't want to take equities, for example. The last thing you want to do is invest in the highest possible place, and then when the market corrects itself, lose money. That's not what you want to do. Employed where it is believed the market's view on future interest rates movements implied by the yield curve is incorrect or has failed to be anticipated. Again, what we are talking about here on the market timing is the mispricing. The market has not adjusted the price of the bond in relation to the anticipated or implied yield curve, interest rate curve. And as a result, there is a mispricing there. Right? So you're constantly searching for these strategies, and you will constantly keep buying into the strategies where the mispricing is there. And when the market corrects itself, you will exit making a money, making your gain, right? So it involves some level of active management. Passive bond strategies, on the other hand, this is markets are assumed to be efficient now. The strategy is what? Buy and hold. Also used when developing around meeting a future liability fixed in nominal terms. Now, when the market is efficient, if you try to go ahead with an active strategy, what will happen is market is efficient, meaning most of the information is reflected. What will happen is the relative return that you can make is going to be low. But because of your active approach to trading and strategy, the related cost is going to be high. And at the end of the day, the net situation, highly likely that you're going to have a negative position. If when markets are efficient, if you try to be an active investor, then you have to go with this buy and hold strategy. This passive bond strategy, I'm just playing this in the head. Should I be telling this? But okay, I'll tell it to you. Is also used when we are, this is also called immunization. Let's say you have a liability. You have to make payments, let's say on a mortgage. Let's look at an individual, or you're looking at a company and you're talking about a debenture, whatever it might be. But essentially the payment structure for you is, let's say you pay $5,000 annually for the next 5 years. And at the 5th year, you also have to return principal amount of $1 million, right? Hypothetically. Or let's say $100,000. You get 5% annually for years 1 to 5. And at the end of year 5, you have to return $100 principal as well. That's your payment structure. If I can structure a bond strategy or a portfolio where I am going to be receiving coupons of $5 annually for the next 5 years, and at the end of the respective tenor, I also receive a principal of $100. What have I done? I have met my liabilities exactly in nominal terms. I have exactly met the respective liability. I have immunized my exposure here as well. Although at the exam, I don't think you should be using that word. Immunization we looked at previously. But you're seeing how the structure can come together as well, right? See, when you know financial markets, when you know the instruments out there, the structures that you can put together are absolutely fantastic, isn't it? You raise money for the purpose of investing in growth, and out of a proportion of the money, if you can set up a structure where you don't have to worry about the liability, right? You just park this immunized structure in place. You can completely focus on your strategy for growth. You don't have to worry about financing to meet the obligation. Where am I going to make the money to repay the capital? Blah, blah, blah. All of this can be very tedious decisions to make. You have a particular obligation which you need to meet. You put a structure in place which responds to that cash flow requirement, done and dusted. You have complete freedom to focus on your strategy and growth, right? These are the benefits that you can get from the structuring or otherwise, right? And it doesn't have to be like, constantly a question can be, we may not have that complicated structure in terms of instruments, but there are, right? From property to rental to commercial to residential to equities to fixed deposits to money markets, there are plenty of instruments out there which you can use to supplement your structures and advice, no problem. For example, in the previous illustration, the immunizing strategy which we looked at, you have an obligation. You may not have a complicated derivative instrument to meet this immunization strategy. All you have to do is find another financial instrument, be it cash, be it savings, be it a fixed deposit. You find another financial instrument which has the reciprocal cash flow. That's it. It's not the instrument that decides whether the strategy is going to work. It is the characteristics of it. If the cash flow and risk characteristics are matched, you've got your structure, right? Immunization is a passive technique employed by bond managers to meet future liabilities, like, for example, what I just showed you, insulated from interest rate changes achieved through cash matching. Constructing a bond portfolio whose coupon and redemption payments, cash flows, are synchronized to match those liabilities to be met. That is what I just illustrated to you as well, right? We are immunizing our exposure. Duration based, where we will construct, so there's on a more in-depth perspective, you can have this cash matching as an immunization approach, or you can have this duration matching. Duration meaning the portfolio is constructed with the same initial values as the present value of the liability, and it is designed to meet the same duration of this liability. Without going into the detail here, it is a little technical, which is not required here. Duration, from a technical perspective, we are talking about the sensitivity of the bond's price to the changes in the interest rate. And empirically, according to research, 90 to 95% of that price fluctuation is explained by interest rate changes. And if we can put in a duration driven strategy where that 90 to 95% I'm immunized against that interest rate fluctuation, that's a pretty darn good hedge for me, isn't it? Right? The variance, volatility, etc. is coming down pretty drastically. Bond funds, right? Similar to the collective investment products that we've looked at previously, but with a different instrument. Alternatively, you can use a mutual fund that invests in bonds to gain the respective exposure as well. Right? We've discussed this in collective instruments. It offers investors a way to invest in the bond markets and allow an investor to diversify risks across a broad range of securities and access professional selection and management of portfolio securities. We recognized under collective instruments achieving the level of diversification, right? Looking at a range of securities, accessing professional selection, and the management of a portfolio selection. By you choosing a fund, you will have access to all of these benefits as well, because the quantum, the economies of scale, the access to research, the professional management, all that will come to you. All those are going to be benefits that will come to you as a result of investing in a bond, in a fund rather, right? And when you look at a bond fund also, you get all of these exposures. Think about that level of diversification that we spoke about just before the break. The quantum of funds that you need to achieve that is fairly significant, isn't it? But the fund will have that, likely have that level of quantum to achieve that level of diversification. So you as a retail investor can piggyback on those benefits that the fund manager will have and reap the same diversification risk reward benefits. Advantages: diversification, professional management, liquidity, assuming the fund is traded, you can assume to have a regular income stream depending on the bond structure, fund structure as well. Which brings us to bond selection. Now we recognize, right, within wealth, how you can diversify, within the asset classes, how do you diversify, within that section, how do you look at different issuers, within the different issuers or the industries, how do you go about it, is the bond selection aspect. Right? Careful selection is necessary between the options available for investors to invest in. What are these considerations, right? Because bonds are also going to have different characteristics. You might want to have an exposure to a high yield bond because you are after return. But that may not be suitable to the average retail investor because the accompanying risk of the high yield bond doesn't match with the circumstances and the risk tolerance of the client. Right? So we can't look at only one facet of investing at any given context, right? That is what we've been thinking about across the board. Whether the investor is able to invest in certain sectors, issuers, etc. Average maturity. Although the curriculum doesn't go into this in detail, when you look at bonds and when you look at a bond fund, this average maturity is one of the go-to indicators when it comes to analyzing the funds, right? But we don't go into the detail there, but just for your information purposes. Funds will have a range of maturity and we take the average maturity in terms of, it's a key factor for determining, for example, duration. Now, we explained that interest rate changes explains nearly all of the price fluctuation in a bond, right? And this duration is about that sensitivity of the price to the fluctuation in the interest rate. And this average maturity in a fund is going to have a bearing on that sensitivity factor there, right? Without going into the detail. Credit quality, understandable, right? The credit quality of the underlying security is also going to have a major bearing on the quality of the bond. If the collateral is good, if the collateral is fixed versus if the collateral is variable, all of these aspects is going to have loan to value ratio, whether it's a subprime asset or not, which is being secured against, right? All of these will have implications to the credit quality as well. Performance, whether the higher yields are being achieved through investments in low quality securities. Look, we established why are these high yield securities? It is not because the issuers have good credit quality. It is because the issuers have bad credit quality. And to compensate for that additional risk, they are giving you a higher return. That's why they are high yield bonds, junk bonds. You can't go and put your money in junk bonds and not think about where they are investing in, right? If the underlying investments is of low quality securities, we need to benchmark the return here versus the risk of the investments. Is the return an adequate compensation for this risk which you're taking? Yes, you are after high yielding bonds, but is the reward to risk ratio, is it acceptable? If not, you might as well go and put the money in a investment grade bond. Yield is lower, but so is the risk, right? Which may make the share price of a bond fund investment more volatile. Right? If the underlying securities are going to be of low quality, there can be implications in terms of a volatility aspect as well. Obviously, the fees and charges in terms of selecting any collective investment product or a package product, fees and charges are going to be an important element to distinguish between the investments. Fund managers, when it comes to funds, a major driving factor behind the performance of the bonds of the fund is going to be the fund manager. This is a key criteria when it comes to evaluating funds. You will look at all the other aspects as well. The diversification, the quantum, the industries, the issuers, the asset classes, la-di-da. You look at everything, yes. But before that, you look at the fund manager. Why? All of those decisions, asset classes, security selection, weightage, etc., all of those decisions are whose decisions? Fund manager's decision. So if you've got a good fund manager, that is a major plus point in terms of selecting the bond fund. An alternative to investing in bond funds is exchange traded funds, right? ETFs. We've seen this as well. Bond ETFs can lack liquidity and transparency as it is an over-the-counter market, OTC market, right? Not an exchange-traded market. We've discussed this in our previous studies as well. A bond ETF needs to track a respective index closely in a cost-effective manner despite the lack of liquidity, right? So there are some challenges you're putting in a constraint, liquidity constraint, and you will have to follow the index cost effectively because of the, you can't, it's not easy to reconstitute or recalibrate, not easy, not like equities. You can't buy into some and sell off some so that you can reduce the tracking error. Here, because that liquidity not being present, the possibility that your tracking error is going to be high is very real, because keeping up, aligning, recalibrating to the index can have its challenges, right? So it has to be done in a cost-effective manner. Tax consequences of direct investing in versus investing in funds will be another factor. This is the active-passive argument which we keep having, which can have an implication there as well. Right, that was to do with bonds. Right, now we went through cash, we've seen bonds, and now we are going to see role of equities in a portfolio. Now you're getting that hands-on knowledge about understanding which asset classes in which portfolios to meet which objectives, right? All of it is coming together now. Equities. Now, if you remember our discussion in asset classes and equities, this is towards the latter part of our discussion in the chapter. That is because from cash to money markets to fixed deposits to properties to equity, what is happening is the risk is collectively increasing. And the return potential at the same time is also increasing. And as you can see, that's our first discussion. Equities generally comprise of a higher risk to reward ratio, a higher risk to return ratio. Right? This ratio is way better on equities. Capital performance takes much of the focus, but empirically, dividends and dividend growth have played important roles. So when you look at equities, as we have discussed in the past, the main sources of the return is going to be your capital appreciation and your current income in the form of dividends. More often than not, we are after this. Generally, a greater proportion of the return comes from the capital appreciation. But historically, we have seen, it has been illustrated that the current income also plays an important role as well. Because assume, for example, the market is moving sideways, no growth. Right now, you take the market in the most recent past, you're seeing major growth, right? This is where the capital appreciation is going to play a major role. But if markets are in a lull, now what are you going to do? Capital appreciation is not going to come. In these kind of times, you want to put your money where the dividend yield, we have discussed this in our ratio analysis, companies who have a high dividend yield, who pay a high dividend. Now through the current income, in this context in particular, the current income is going to supplement that return rather than the capital appreciation, right? So even the dividends, the current income does play an important role in terms of the return factor. The main risks associated with holding shares, which we have already discussed, but we be a little, but we look at a more specific element is number one, price risk, a major aspect, right? Share price falling, which can erode the capital of the investor even. You put money into the share when it was $10 and you bought 1,000 shares at $10,000. That was your capital, right? Market goes the other way. Now the share is only worth $2 on 1,000 shares. The value of your investment is literally $2,000. You have lost $8,000 in capital, your investment. You had 10,000, now all you have is 2,000. You have lost your principal values, right? Major risk. Liquidity risk. The inability to resell the shares at a reasonable price. All well and good. There is a 2 rupee stock. You're looking at it going across to 120 rupees, right? But are there buyers at 120 rupees? That was your prediction. Your prediction came true, but can you exit? Can you realize your return? If you can't realize your return, you're going to be stuck with the counter, right? Liquidity. This is generally the case when the markets are falling. Volatility, because markets falling, meaning people are either they are not buying into or they want to exit out of their investments to stop loss, right? Volatility risk, economic factors changing, affecting the market and the prices can be another factor. Equity funds, again, which we have discussed under collective investment products. Factors to consider when investing in equity funds. Identify whether the fund invests globally, regionally, or single country markets to make sure there is no conflict with existing status. Does this make any sense? Let's say you are a holding company and you have invested in companies across automobile, manufacturing, and healthcare. Now you have an additional, now you made a significant amount of return, and you have huge amount of retained earnings, and you're not looking at any direct investments going forward. So you decide to enter into capital markets. How do you enter into capital markets? You want to go ahead with a fund structure, invest in a fund. Now, when choosing the fund, you have to be careful, because if the fund is also investing in automobiles, manufacturing, and healthcare, now we have an issue. Are we going to have any diversification benefits? No. If a variable affecting any of these portfolios materialize, my fund structure is also going to be affected. It makes sense. I look at a fund which is investing in, for example, education, construction, and let's say utilities. Now, any variables affecting here, company specific factors, overlapping here is going to be a little lesser, right? Make sure there is no conflict, because we have to try and give the best possible, reasonably, risk to reward ratio to your client. And this versus this is not the best risk to reward ratio advice that you can give, right? This portfolio versus this one over here is a much better risk to reward ratio that you can offer. What are the market or sectors invested across? Same argument will apply. If you put your money in the banking sector and you're looking at investing in a fund, and if the fund is also majorly invested across in the banking sector, that is not going to give you major benefits. Geographical segments, regions, any investment themes, same aspects which you will look at. If you're looking at your investments are a value driven investment, you may want to think about putting your monies through a fund into a maybe growth oriented investment, for example. The drawbacks will of course be the cost of investing in a fund, which may be expensive in addition to charges. We've seen this in collective investments as well. The front end costs, the back end costs, the management fees, the etc. all can be tedious aspects which you will have to deal with when it comes to a fund. selecting funds for a portfolio. Right? Now, this is a very interesting discussion. Is past performance a reliable guide to future performance? This is always what we look at, right? Past performance, how has the company, how has the fund performed in the past? The probability of above average performing fund is going to continue is a question mark, isn't it? Once you hit the peak, the next place you can go is most likely, not that we are saying it's impossible, is most likely you're going to experience the other way around, right? So sometimes if you look at certain funds, the characteristic has been, the fund has been performing superbly. Investors are coming into the fund, and then suddenly the fund starts going the other way. It's just the nature of it. It's very difficult to continuously maintain your peak, isn't it? Risk of the fund, right? There are many different basis which you will use to evaluate a fund structure, including other ratios like the trainer ratio, Sharpe ratio. All of these are part of their, although not part of our curriculum. Whether it's suitable to the client. Is it a equity fund? Is it a fixed income fund? Is it a market neutral fund? Is it a fixed income arbitrage fund? What is the type of the fund? Is it a fund which uses a heavy amount of leverage and borrowing? Is it appropriate? Is it suitable for my client's risk tolerance? Although past performance is an indicator of future potential performance, it must be weighted against chance. You will be very surprised how many times investors make money. You will be very surprised how many times fund managers make money because of luck. I was speaking to an investor a couple of days ago. So he was laughing when he was so happy, and he was laughing with me when he was talking. And he was saying, for example, when Expo Lanka, when the IPO came just some years ago, he bought in at whatever, 12 or 14 rupees. Right? And he bought a big chunk. And then he said from that day onwards, the share price went down, and it was about a 6 rupee share, and then finally ended up at about 2 and even 1 rupee and 80 rupee share, 1 rupee and 80 cent share. And like by that time, he had forgotten about this investment because like it was such a bad decision for him, right? And like it was just parked somewhere and waiting. And the other day, just a couple of days ago, he was phoning and he was laughing. He was saying, look, what I bought that day at 12 rupees is 120 bucks now. I had even forgotten that I had shares. And this also happens to fund managers as well, believe it or not, right? Massive return for him. Was the performance as a result of change? The ability to rotate between styles to navigate challenging markets. Because you want to see if the fund manager had achieved these returns, or if the fund had achieved the returns due to a luck, then is that luck going to continue? Highly unlikely. Is it because that the fund was flexible enough and they've been navigating different strategies? They've understood capital markets are not performing. Let's park it into fixed income. You make a return. Just before capital markets start peaking, you go and park your monies across. The fund goes and parks the money across in equities. Within equities, they navigate between value and growth stocks. This is where the fund is navigating these different changes and challenging market conditions. Now, that is as a result of competencies of the management there. You would like to put your money into the fund, right? Although there is no certain way of ensuring continuity of fund performance, generally the above criteria is given a good indication of what to expect when you're choosing funds. Obviously, you'd like to see a lot more of this aspect rather than the levels of chance. Factors to consider when investing in equity funds. No, this is what we covered in the previous segment. So you have fund ratings as well, right, which provide ratings for investment funds, most of whom provide this data free of charge for financial advisors as well. Maybe not entirely a directly representative one from a local context. Lipper is a fund rating system which provides a simple, clear description of the fund's success in meeting certain investment objectives. See, ultimately, when we say a fund is successful, what are we trying to say? That the fund earned 30%, 40%, 50%? No. A fund is successful if it is meeting its investment objectives. If a fund tells you our strategy is a market neutral strategy and they go long on market exposure and generate your investment return, they don't have the right to tell you that their fund was successful. They took a completely opposite investment strategy to generate the returns, exposing their investors to significant amounts of additional risk in pursuit of that return. In fact, that fund has failed. They didn't meet their investment objective, right? So important, fund success means investment objective, such as could be preserving capital, lowering the expenses, lowering the risk, building the wealth. All of these can be part of the investment objectives. The ratings are derived from formulas which analyze the funds against certain metrics, and they are compared to the peers, and only those that truly stand out are awarded Lipper leader status, right? Which obviously will help you to market your funds to potential investors. Morningstar is another qualitative rating system in the assessment of funds and investment merits. The rating is based on the conviction of a fund's ability to outperform its peer groups and or relevant benchmark. This is another important element, peer groups and relevant benchmarks. Because when you look at funds, you will have income-oriented fund, you will have growth-oriented fund, you will have growth at any cost-oriented fund, you will have value-driven funds, right? You will have different styles of funds. You can't take randomly the market, you can't randomly take an investment manager and benchmark it and say we did better or worse off. No. You have to benchmark it against an appropriate peer group. All the players in the group have similar strategies or a relevant benchmark. All of them are, for example, going to be in the strategy of a value-oriented or growth-oriented strategy, right? Then the comparisons are going to make a lot more sense and more meaningful. Evaluation can be based on the process. What is their strategy? What is the competitive advantage? Can the fund consistently apply it? Right? Another, it's a very relevant point. I am going to be looking at a high risk investment strategy to generate 100% return. You might be able to do this in the short term, possibly, particularly with a market like ours. But can you consistently generate this return? Now, this is going to be a huge question mark. Performance. Is the performance logical? Is the risk-adjusted return adequate? If I tell you my fund returned 50% to the investors, everybody will be like, wow, amazing, right? But what if I had to generate this 50%? I was, hypothetically, taking 150% return from leverage to asset classes to security selection. Everything which I went about it, the entire process that I went about it was risky. Is this a good risk adjusted basis? 50 units of return for 150 units of risk, right? You're talking about what, 0.33 as a ratio. Whereas when you looked at the fixed deposit market, it returned, let's put an easy number, 10% for 5 units of risk. It gave me a much better risk to reward ratio, right? Is this an adequate compensation for the risk that you're taking? No. Performance over a period of time and on a risk adjusted basis. People, as I mentioned, the manager's talent, very important. The decisions relating to the fund is driven by obviously the managers, the resources, right? tenor, resources, etc. are going to be very important as well. Parent, what priorities prevail over the firm? Stewardship or salesmanship? Salesmanship is probably what you will see in most of our financial markets. Everybody's trying to sell you something. They don't give a hoot about your circumstances, risk tolerances, etc. And they only sell you the return. You don't realize even the risk that is accompanying the return. Stewardship, this is what we need to build ourselves to, the fiduciary duty. You are stewardship, meaning you are taking into consideration the client's well-being. You're operating in the best interest of your client. Now, that is the type of fund you should be more preferable to. Price, value proposition versus similar funds helps us to benchmark and select between different fund strategies. Fund fact sheets which you come across, these are important for investors to select between funds, which will also include information such as the objective of the fund. Are you an income-oriented fund, a growth-oriented fund, a socially responsible investing fund? What is the fund's profile? What are the asset allocations like? Composition, turnover, performance? How do you measure the risk? All of this will help clients gauge whether it is suitable to them or not. Risk measures have particularly increased in importance and are measured through versus benchmarks. Right? Investors are getting more and more savvy across the days, and they are also very seriously considering risk as a metric as well. So some of these risk measures are standard deviation, R squared, information ratio, Sharpe ratio, etc. Right? All very interesting ratios. This talks about variance and standard deviation, the go-to method for risk. R square explains the movement, what is the power of the independent variables explanation of the movement in the dependent variable. Sorry, it's the other way around. Yeah, no, that is correct. Information and Sharpe ratio are looking at incremental return per unit of risk. What are you returning? Right? Although again, the details are not part of our curriculum, but very interesting ratios. When you look at fund manager ratings, advisors also look to fund managers as well to identify with its performance. It's an important one, right? Who makes the decisions for the asset allocations, percentages, security selections, etc.? The fund manager. Fund managers regularly switch funds and jobs. You may not see it to a huge extent here, but in a global international context, it's very real. Right? So some of the top performing funds are not necessarily being run by the managers who are responsible for the high performing funds. So you have a manager, makes fantastic asset allocation decisions, security selection decisions are fantastic. He brings the fund to a wonderful value. He gets offered by a much better company. What does he do? Obviously, he switches. Now, the company is marketing the fund status based on that fund manager's performance, right? But that fund manager is no longer there. Whether the fund can continue to perform at that level is a question mark, isn't it? Fund size, this is also an important one. When it comes to a fund, the size, the assets under management, AUMs as we call it, is important. As an actively managed fund becomes larger, its performance can suffer. Fund charges also are an important decision. This is important. You know, when you're looking at a buy and hold strategy, when you look at more passive, skewed towards a more passive oriented approach, the quantum of funds will play a major role, right? Particularly as it will apply to the charges as well. And sometimes as funds become larger and the level of activity increases and the associated transaction costs and otherwise increase, your performance might actually even suffer. Right, which brings us to our next section, which is on risk and return. But I think it's a good place to call it a day to cover most of the investment management aspects as well. Right. So any questions, guys, before we close shop? Right, I sure hope everybody is paying attention. And the sessions are interesting as well. Now it's like super hands-on as well. I'm trying to keep it as less, there's nothing technical going across over here. I'm just trying to keep it easy and flowing, so you can understand from any given context. You might be involved in any aspect. At the end of the day, you're selling a product and you need to be able to do it most effective, right? A financial product, and all of this information is going to help you to do so effectively as well, right? So approaching the end of the program as well, probably a couple of weeks we should be able to wrap up and get you prepared for exam as well, right? So I reiterate, do spend time with your curriculum. It is very important. These discussions are important. You can use the slides as the short notes. It is entirely representative of the content in the curriculum as well, nothing outside, all from the curriculum as well. And there is some other additional detail which you can look into as it applies to the curriculum. Very important that you do spend time with the curriculum. Right. So until next week, then do be safe, and I shall catch up with you next week. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone.